When the widow asked, "Have you eaten?" the lonely cowboy found a home he never meant to need. The first time Clara Whitlow saw the cowboy standing in her doorway, he looked less like a man asking for help and more like a man who had forgotten the world still offered it. Rain rolled off the brim of his black hat. Mud clung to his boots in heavy patches. One hand held a broken saddlebag strap and the other stayed close to his side, as if he was used to keeping something hurt hidden from plain sight. Clara did not ask his name at first. She only looked at his pale face, the rain dripping from his coat, and the way his eyes moved around her small sewing shop without resting too long on anything. Men like him did that when they were not sure if a room was safe. Outside, the town of Mercy Ridge had already gone quiet under the storm. The last wagon had rattled down Main Street an hour ago. The lamps in the mercantile were dark. Even the saloon piano had fallen silent, leaving only the rain tapping on the porch roof and the wind pushing dust into wet corners. Clara stood behind her work table, with a needle still caught between her fingers. "You need that fixed tonight?" she asked. The cowboy looked down at the strap, as if he had forgotten why he came. "Morning would do," he said. His voice was low and rough from cold. "I can pay." Most folks in Mercy Ridge came to Clara for mending, but they did not come after dark unless something was torn bad enough to matter. Dresses, coats, feed sacks, reins, saddle straps, little boots with the soles giving way. She repaired what other people were not ready to throw out. Maybe that was why she lived at the edge of town. There were things in her own life she had kept mending long after others would have called them ruined. She took the strap from him. The leather was wet but strong underneath. The stitching had torn loose where the weight pulled hardest. "This was patched badly before," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You do it yourself." A faint tiredness moved across his mouth, not quite a smile. "Tried to." Clara ran her thumb over the old holes. "You work at the barrow place." "For now." That meant drifting work. Ranch hands came and went from the barrow spread every season. Some stayed a month. Some stayed through cattle drives. Some left before their coffee cooled, depending on how hard the foreman pushed and how much trouble followed them. Clara set the strap on the table. "Come back tomorrow near noon." He nodded once, much obliged. He turned toward the door, but a gust of wind pushed rain across the porch, and for one moment the lantern beside Clara's window shook so hard the flame leaned flat. The cowboy paused. His eyes fell on the small brass lantern hanging inside the front window. It was not there for customers. Everyone in Mercy Ridge knew that. Clara lit it every evening before sundown and left it burning until she went to bed. For 3 years, no one had asked her why. Not after the fever took her husband, Matthew, and their little girl, Annie, within 4 days of each other. Not after Clara stopped coming to church suppers. Not after she sold the family wagon, closed the back bedroom, and moved her sewing table into the front room so she would never have to sit in the kitchen alone. People in town had learned to lower their voices around her grief. They thought it was kindness. Sometimes it felt like another locked door. The cowboy looked at the lantern longer than most men would have dared. Then he looked away, touched the brim of his hat, and stepped back into the rain. Clara watched him cross the muddy yard to his horse. He moved carefully, favoring his left side. The horse tossed its head against the weather, but when the cowboy placed one hand on its neck, the animal settled. That small gesture made Clara's fingers tight around the broken strap. A man could lie with his mouth. He could wear a clean shirt, speak gentle words, tip his hat just right, and still carry meanness under his ribs. But a horse usually knew. By noon the next day, the storm had passed, leaving Mercy Ridge washed pale and cold. Clara had the strap finished before the church bell rang. She should have placed it on the shelf and gone back to the blue dress waiting for new cuffs, but instead she kept turning the saddlebag strap over in her hands. Her stitches were even, the leather was oiled, it would hold. Still, she found herself listening for hoofbeats. When they came, she looked up too quickly and disliked herself for it. The cowboy stepped onto the porch with his hat in hand. In daylight, he looked younger than he had in the rain, maybe 36 or 37, with dark hair, tired gray eyes, and a face browned by years of sun and open country. A short scar marked one cheek near his jaw, old and pale. Clara handed him the strap. He tested the repair with both hands, not rough, careful. "This is fine work," he said. "It will hold if you do not overload it." That sounds like advice for more than leather. Clara glanced at him. He looked sorry the moment the words left his mouth, as if he had stepped too near a fence line he had not seen. "I did not mean offense," he said. "You did not give any." He paid the full price without argument, placing the coins on the table one by one. Many men tried to bargain with a widow, not because they lacked money, but because they thought loneliness made a woman easier to press. This man did not. "My name is Caleb Rusk," he said. "Clara Whitlow." "I know." That made her still. Caleb saw it and lowered his eyes. "The storekeeper told me where to come. She said you did honest work." Clara breathed again, though her hand remained near the coins. "The storekeeper talks too much." "Yes, ma'am." He picked up the strap, gave a small nod, and left. That should have been the end of him. For 3 evenings after, Clara saw him pass by her shop at a distance, riding between the Barrow Ranch Road and town. He never slowed in a way that forced her to notice, never called out, never tipped his hat from far away like men did when they wanted credit for being polite. But each time he passed, his head turned just enough to see the lantern in her window. And each time, Clara pretended not to notice. On the 4th evening, trouble came just before dark. Harlan Pike, a cattle buyer with a red face and a coat too fine for his manners, came to collect a repaired bridle. He had agreed to the price 2 days earlier. Now he stood in Clara's doorway, holding the bridle in one hand and half the money in the other. "This is fair," Harlan said. "A woman alone ought to be glad for steady business." Clara kept her voice calm. "The price was $1.20. And I am offering 70. Then the bridle stays here." Harlan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You think because this town pities you, that makes you strong." The words struck the room harder than his raised voice would have. Clara's hand moved to the edge of the table. Her wedding ring, hanging on a ribbon around her neck beneath her dress, felt suddenly heavy against her skin. Before she could answer, hoofbeats stopped outside. A quiet voice came from the road. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Whitlow?" Clara turned. Caleb Rusk sat on his horse beyond the porch steps, one hand resting loose on the saddle horn. He was not reaching for a gun. He was not glaring. He was simply there, calm as a fence post, watching without pushing his way in. Harlan looked at him, then at Clara, then at the bridle in his hand. Something in the silence changed. "Not much. Just enough." Harlan tossed the rest of the coins onto the table. "Keep your scraps and stitches." He walked past Caleb without meeting his eyes and disappeared down the wet road. Clara stood still until the sound of Harlan's boots faded. Then she gathered the coins slowly, not because she cared about the money in that moment, but because her hands needed something to do. Caleb remained outside. He did not ask if she was frightened. He did not tell her what she should have done. He did not step onto the porch like a man expecting thanks. That was why, when Clara finally looked at him, the question came out before she had time to hide it. "Have you eaten?" Caleb blinked once. The town was dim behind him. The last light of evening rested on his shoulders. His horse shifted in the mud, leather creaking softly. "No, ma'am," he said. Clara opened the door a little wider. "I made beans and biscuits. There is enough." For a moment Caleb did not move. He looked at the doorway, then at the lantern glowing in the front window, then back at Clara. Something guarded in his face loosened, just a little, like a tired not giving way. He swung down from the saddle and tied his horse to the porch rail. Clara stepped back into the warm room, suddenly aware of the empty chair at her table, the second cup she had not used in 3 years, and the strange sound of another person's boots crossing her floor. She told herself it was only supper. Only kindness returned for kindness. Only one rainy-eyed cowboy eating beans at her table before riding back to the barrow bunkhouse. But when Caleb removed his hat and stood quietly near the door, the lantern flame trembled in the window though no wind had touched it. And Clara felt, for the first time in years, that the silence in her house had heard someone knock. Caleb Rusk sat at Clara Whitlow's kitchen table like a man who did not know what to do with warmth. He held the tin cup in both hands even though the coffee was no longer hot enough to need that kind of care. His hat rested on the chair beside him. Rainwater had dried in dark patches on his coat shoulders. The lamplight caught the edge of the scar near his jaw and made it look softer than it had outside. Clara moved around the small room with the practiced quiet of a woman used to feeding only herself. Beans in a blue bowl, biscuits wrapped in a cloth, butter scraped thin from a crock. She placed everything on the table without making a show of it. Her hands knew how to serve supper, but her heart seemed unsure what to do with a man sitting across from her again. Caleb noticed, but he did not point it out. That was already something. Most men had a way of stepping into a woman's lonely room and acting like they owned the air inside it. Caleb did not. He waited before reaching for the food, as if the table still belonged to the grief that had sat there longer than he had. Clara took the chair opposite him. "You do not talk much," she said. Caleb broke a biscuit in half. "I talk when I have something worth saying." "And when you do not?" "I try not to ruin the quiet." Clara looked down at her cup. That answer should not have touched her, but it did. For 3 years people had tried to fill her quiet. They brought pies and advice. They told her time would heal. They told her Matthew and Annie were in a better place. They told her she was still young, as if being young made losing them lighter. No one had ever thought to leave the quiet alone. Caleb ate slowly, not like a starving man, though Clara could see from the hollow under his cheekbones that ranch food had not been generous lately. He thanked her after every small thing, not loudly, not too often, but with a kind of careful respect that made the room feel less strange. Outside, the mud road darkened. The horse tied at the rail shifted once, blowing softly through its nose. The lantern in the front window burned steady. Caleb's eyes moved toward it again. Clara saw him look. This time, she did not pretend otherwise. "It bothers you?" she asked. He turned back. "No, ma'am." "You keep looking at it." "I was wondering who it was for." The words settled between them. Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. For one sharp moment the room was no longer warm. It was spring again, fever sheets, a small hand burning in hers, Matthew trying to stand when he had no strength left, Annie whispering for water, the doctor lowering his eyes before he spoke. Caleb saw the door close behind her eyes. "I should not have asked," he said. Clara stood too quickly and reached for his bowl. "You want more?" "No, thank you." She carried the bowl to the basin, though it was not empty. Her back stayed turned. Caleb did not follow the question. He did not apologize again. He only sat there, hands folded around the cup, letting her have the space to return or not return as she chose. After a while, Clara set the bowl down. "My husband used to hang it there," she said. Her voice was even but thin. Caleb looked at the lantern, then lowered his gaze to the table. Matthew, she continued. He would come in late from the livery some nights. Annie would sit right there by the window and wait for the light of his lantern coming up the road. She thought if ours was lit, he could find his way faster. A faint breath passed through her nose, almost a laugh but not quite. She was 6. She believed light could hurry a person home. Caleb's thumb moved once along the side of his cup. Clara did not know why she kept speaking. She had not told this much to anyone in a long time. Maybe because Caleb was not staring at her with pity. Maybe because he was looking at the table as if every word deserved a place to land. When they died, I could not stand the dark window, so I lit it anyway. Rain dripped from the roof outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and fell silent. Caleb said nothing for so long Clara thought he might not answer at all. Then he said, "That is a good reason. No pity. No sermon. No soft lie about healing. Just that." Clara turned toward him. For the first time that evening, she truly looked at Caleb Rusk, not as the wet stranger who had brought a broken strap, not as the man who had sat on his horse while Harlan Pike swallowed his pride, not as a ranch hand passing through town. As a man carrying something too. There was a tiredness in him that did not come from one day's work. His eyes held distance, not coldness, like he had ridden away from something long ago and never stopped feeling it behind him. "You have family?" she asked. A small pause. "Had." The word was plain, but it carried weight. Clara waited. She knew better than to reach into another person's wound with both hands. Caleb looked toward the window again. "My mother died when I was young. My father raised horses near Abilene. Good man when sober, hard man when not." Clara sat back down slowly. "He taught me to ride before I could read," Caleb said. "Said a horse would tell me the truth quicker than most people. He was right about that. And now I take work where I can." "That is not an answer." "No," he said quietly, "it is not." The honesty of that surprised her more than the refusal. He finished his coffee and placed the cup down carefully, lined with the edge of the table as if he did not want to leave even a small mess behind. "I should go," he said. Clara looked at the window. Night had fully taken the road. The Barrow Ranch lay 3 miles east, and the path would still be soft from rain. "You can wait until the moon rises," she said. Caleb picked up his hat. "Mrs. Whitlow, I thank you for supper, but a town like this sees more than it says. I will not give folks a reason to put your name in their mouths." There it was again. Care without ownership. Protection without pride. Clara wanted to say that the town already put her name in its mouth, that they had chewed on her sorrow for 3 years with good intentions and sad eyes, that she was tired of living like a glass object on a high shelf. But the words would not come. So she only nodded. At the door, Caleb put on his hat and stepped onto the porch. Clara followed him as far as the threshold. The cold air touched her face. The lantern behind her threw gold light across the porch boards and over Caleb's shoulder. His horse lifted its head at his approach. Caleb untied the reins, then paused. "Harlan Pike has a mean tongue," he said, "but men like that usually come back meaner when they have been made to feel small." Clara's chin lifted. "I have handled men like Harlan before." "I believe you." That answer stopped her. Most warnings came wrapped in doubt. His did not. Caleb swung into the saddle. The leather creaked under him. "I pass this road most evenings," he said. "Not close, just the road." Clara understood what he meant. He would not crowd her. He would not call it protection. He would simply be near enough for trouble to think twice. She should have told him not to. Instead, she said, "Good night, Mr. Rusk." Good night, Mrs. Whitlow. He rode into the dark, not looking back. Clara stood in the doorway until hoofbeats faded beyond the scrub grass. Then she closed the door and leaned against it, one hand pressed flat over the ribbon beneath her dress, where Matthew's ring rested against her heart. The house was quiet again, but not the same quiet. On the table, Caleb's cup sat empty beside hers. 2 circles marked the wood where coffee had warmed the surface. Clara stared at them for a long time before she washed anything. The next morning, Mercy Ridge woke bright and cold, and by noon, the town already knew Caleb Rusk had eaten supper at the widow's shop. Lydia Marsh at the Mercantile did not mention it when Clara came in for thread. Reverend Bell only tipped his hat. 2 women near the flour sacks stopped talking too quickly. Clara bought what she needed, counted her coins, and walked out with her back straight. But near the hitching post, Harlan Pike stood smoking a thin cigar. He smiled when he saw her. "Careful, Mrs. Whitlow," he called. "A hungry cowboy will eat at any table that opens." Clara kept walking. His voice followed her down the boardwalk. And some men only stay long enough to take what a lonely woman gives. She did not turn. She would not give him that. But when she reached her shop and closed the door, her hands were shaking so hard the thread slipped from her fingers. That evening, the lantern was lit in the window before sunset. Clara told herself it was for Matthew and Annie. The same as always. But when hoofbeats sounded on the road just after dusk, her heart betrayed her by knowing them before her mind did. Caleb passed at a respectful distance. He did not stop. He only slowed enough to look toward the window. Clara stood behind the curtain unseen, watching him ride by. And for the first time in 3 years, she wondered if a light meant for the dead could also guide the living home. By the next Sunday, Mercy Ridge had turned Caleb Rusk into a story it could pass from porch to porch. At the church steps, his name moved softly between gloved hands and folded hymn books. At the Mercantile, women pretended to compare sugar prices while glancing toward the East Road. In the saloon, men wondered why a rider with Caleb's seat, and hands had settled for fence work at the Barrow place when half the territory could have used a man like him on the racing circuit. Clara heard enough to know they were talking. She heard too much to keep pretending it did not matter. "People have mouths," Lydia Marsh said that Monday morning, tying brown paper around a spool of navy thread. "Most of them do not know what to do with the silence between meals." Clara gave her a tired look. "Is that meant to comfort me?" "No, it is meant to remind you not to feed them." Lydia was near 50, square-shouldered, plain-spoken, and able to cut a yard of cloth straighter than most men could draw a road. She owned the Mercantile, knew every debt in Mercy Ridge, and had the rare gift of helping people without making them feel smaller. Clara placed her coins on the counter. "I gave a man supper, that is all." "I know. Does the town?" "The town knows nothing. It guesses loudly." Clara looked out the front window. Across the street, Harlan Pike stood near the feed office, speaking with 2 cattle hands. He laughed at something and glanced toward the Mercantile as if he could feel her looking. Lydia followed Clara's gaze. "That man was born with vinegar where his heart ought to be," Lydia said. "He paid what he owed." Only because Caleb Rusk was watching. Clara gathered her parcel. "I did not ask him to watch." "No," Lydia said gently, "but you are not sorry he did." That landed too close. Clara tucked the parcel under her arm and left before Lydia could see the answer on her face. The air outside smelled of cold dust and chimney smoke. Autumn had come to Mercy Ridge with dry leaves along the boardwalk and a thin silver edge in the mornings. Clara crossed the street, aware of Harlan's eyes following her, and kept her chin lifted until she reached the sewing shop. Only after she shut the door did her shoulders fall. Work waited in neat piles. A boy's coat needing buttons, a torn wagon cover, a blue Sunday dress with the hem let down for a girl growing faster than her mother's budget allowed. Clara sat and stitched because stitching gave her something to hold steady when the rest of life would not. By late afternoon, clouds gathered over the ridge. She had just lit the lantern in the front window when someone knocked. For one foolish second, her heart jumped toward Caleb. But it was not Caleb. A young woman stood on the porch with a gray shawl pulled tight around her hair. Her name was Millie Dawes, newly married, 19 at most, with anxious eyes and a basket held close to her chest. "Mrs. Whitlow," Millie said, "could you mend this by tomorrow? I would not ask, but James tore it on wire, and he has to ride north with Mr. Pike at first light." Clara took the shirt from the basket. The sleeve was ripped badly, but not beyond saving. "I can have it ready." Millie stepped inside, glancing at the lantern. Her gaze softened in that careful way people used around Clara's grief. "My mother says it is sweet," she said. "What is?" "The light." Clara folded the shirt over her arm. "Your mother says many things." Millie flushed. "I did not mean harm." "I know." The girl hesitated instead of leaving. Her fingers worried the edge of the basket. "Mrs. Whitlow, may I ask you something?" Clara already wanted to say no, but the tremble in Millie's voice stopped her. "You may ask. Do you think a man can be kind at supper and cruel by morning?" The room seemed to lose its air. Clara set the shirt on the table. "Has James hurt you?" Millie looked down quickly. "No, not in the way people mean when they ask that." "That is not an answer." The girl's mouth pressed tight. "He gets angry when he drinks, says things, breaks things. Then he says he is sorry and brings me candy from the store." She looked up, ashamed of tears that had not yet fallen. "My mother says marriage takes patience." Clara felt an old ache move through her chest, not from Matthew, who had never made her fear a slammed door, but from the many women she had seen taught to swallow fear and call it duty. "Patience is not the same as being crushed," Clara said. Millie stared at her. The words had come sharper than Clara intended, but she did not take them back. Before either woman could speak again, a horse stopped outside. Millie stiffened so suddenly Clara knew who it was before the door opened. James Dawes stood on the porch, young, broad-shouldered, and red around the eyes. He looked from Clara to Millie to the shirt on the table. "What are you whispering about?" he asked. Millie stood. "Nothing, I brought your shirt." "I did not ask you to stay for tea." Clara stepped around the table. "She was speaking with me." James looked at her with a crooked smile. "Widows give marriage counsel now." The lantern flame moved in the window. Clara felt the old town watching through walls that were not there. She thought of Harlan Pike laughing across the street. She thought of all the times she had kept quiet because people already pitied her enough. Then she thought of Caleb asking from the road, "Everything all right?" Sometimes a quiet question could lend courage even after the man who asked it was gone. "Some women learn by losing a good man," Clara said. "Some learn by watching bad ones while there is still time." James's face changed. Millie's breath caught. For a moment, Clara wondered if she had gone too far. Then another voice came from the yard, calm and low. "Evening." Caleb stood beside his horse, hat in hand. Dust lay across his coat from a day's work. He was not close to the porch steps, not threatening, not claiming the right to be there, but his eyes were fixed on James. James looked at him with anger first, then uncertainty. Caleb's gaze moved to Millie. "Ma'am." Millie nodded barely. No one spoke. The silence did the hard work. James snatched the torn shirt from the table, muttered something under his breath, and stepped off the porch. Millie followed, but at the bottom step she looked back at Clara. It was only one look. A frightened girl's look. A grateful girl's look. A look that said she had heard more than the words. When they were gone, Clara remained by the table, her hand still resting where the shirt had been. Caleb did not enter. "Was not meaning to intrude," he said. "You keep arriving when men are at their worst. I have worked ranches long enough to know worst usually waits until evening." That almost made Clara smile, almost. He looked toward the road where James and Millie had gone. "She all right?" "No." Caleb accepted that answer as truth, not gossip. Clara looked at him. "Would you like coffee?" His face softened with surprise, but he did not move until she stepped aside from the doorway. Inside, the room seemed less strange with him than it had the first night. That frightened Clara more than the strangeness had. He took the same chair. She poured coffee. No supper this time, only biscuits left from morning and a little apple preserve in a chipped dish. They spoke of ordinary things first. Fence posts, cold mornings, the price of flour. Ordinary words were safer. They built a small bridge over deeper water. But Caleb looked tired in a way Clara could not ignore. "There is talk about you," she said at last. He glanced at her over his cup. "Only now." "In town." "There is always talk in town. They say you used to ride races." His hand stilled. Clara watched the quiet close around him. Not anger, not fear, something older. "I did," he said. "And now you mend fences." "Fences do not cheer when you win or curse when you lose." "That why you stopped?" Caleb set the cup down. For a long moment, Clara thought he would stand, take his hat and leave the question behind. Instead, he looked at the lantern in the window. "I stopped because one day I liked the cheering too much," he said. Clara waited. There was a race near Santa Loma. Big purse, bigger crowd. A young rider came up beside me at the last turn. His horse was lathered bad, but he pushed anyway. I could have eased off, still would have placed, still would have eaten that night. His jaw tightened. But I wanted the line first. Clara felt her breath slow. "His horse went down?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded once. "Broke the animal's leg. The boy lived but not whole. Folks said it was racing, said I did not touch him, said every man rides his own choice." He looked at her then, and the grief in his face was not loud. It was a wound kept clean but never healed. "They handed me the prize money before the dust settled." Clara's fingers rested against the table edge. "What did you do?" "I left it with the boy's mother and rode out before morning." "That does not make you guilty." "No," Caleb said, "but it did make me see what kind of man I was becoming." The room went quiet around them. Outside, wind moved along the porch. The lantern flame leaned and rose again. Clara thought of Matthew's steady hands, Annie's laugh, the way grief could freeze a person in one moment until years passed around it. Caleb's pain was different, but she knew the shape of a life built around one day. If this part of the story touches your heart, stay with Clara and Caleb a little longer. Some wounds on the frontier do not bleed where people can see them, but they still decide every road a person takes. Caleb looked at his hat on the chair. "I did not tell you that for pity. I would not give you any." A faint breath left him. "No, I expect you would not." For the first time, Clara smiled. Small, brief, but real enough that Caleb saw it and looked down at his cup, as if he had been handed something too fine to stare at directly. The moment did not last. A hard knock struck the door. Clara stood. Caleb rose with her, but she gave him one look and he stayed where he was. When she opened the door, Lydia Marsh stood on the porch, her face pale beneath her bonnet. "Clara," she said, breathless, It is Millie Dawes. Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. What happened? Lydia looked past her at Caleb, then back at Clara. She came to my store crying. James rode north without her, but Harlan Pike is saying you filled her head against her husband. He is telling men you are ruining homes now. Clara's face went cold. Lydia swallowed. And he says if Mercy Ridge has any sense left, it will stop sending decent work to a widow who invites strange cowboys to her table. Behind Clara, Caleb's chair scraped softly against the floor. The lantern burned in the window between them all. And outside, down the dark street, Mercy Ridge was beginning to choose what kind of town it wanted to be. The words did not strike Clara all at once. They came in pieces. Millie crying at the mercantile. James gone north. Harlan Pike spreading poison through town. Her own name being carried from one mouth to another like a torn cloth nobody meant to mend. For a moment, Clara only stood in the doorway with Lydia Marsh on the porch and Caleb behind her in the lamplit room. The lantern burned between them, gold against the window glass, steady as a held breath. Then Clara opened the door wider. "Come in before the cold gets you," she said. Lydia stepped inside, rubbing her hands together. Her eyes moved once to Caleb, but she did not seem surprised to find him there. If anything, she looked relieved. Caleb picked up his hat from the chair. "I should go." "No," Lydia said quickly. Both Clara and Caleb looked at her. Lydia's mouth tightened. "Not because you owe anyone your presence, but because Harlan Pike is counting on decent people stepping aside while he talks. That is how men like him build a throne out of dust." Clara closed the door. "Lydia." "I know you do not like a fuss," Lydia turned to her, "but this is already a fuss. The only question is whether you let Harlan tell it alone." Clara felt heat rise behind her eyes, and she hated it. She had spent 3 years surviving pity. She knew the shape of people's looks before they gave them. She knew the softened voices, the careful hands, the sad smiles that followed her through church aisles and store counters. Now Harlan had found a new use for her sorrow. A lonely widow. A strange cowboy. A young wife crying. It was enough for a cruel man to stitch together an ugly story. Caleb stood silent near the chair, his hat in both hands. "What exactly is he saying?" Clara asked. Lydia hesitated. Clara's voice sharpened. "Say it plainly." Lydia drew a breath. "That you encouraged Millie to leave her husband because you cannot bear other women having what you lost. That Caleb has been spending evenings here. That the lantern is not for Matthew and Annie anymore, but for him." The room went still. Clara's face did not change, but her fingers curled at her sides. Caleb looked toward the lantern, as if the accusation had dirtied something sacred. "That is a lie," he said. His voice was low, not loud, somehow worse for being quiet. "Yes," Lydia said, "but lies do not need to stand long if enough people lean on them." Clara turned away and went to the work table. She picked up a needle, then set it down. Picked up thread, then set that down too. Her hands wanted work, but her mind would not follow. "I told Millie the truth," Clara said. "That patience is not the same as being crushed." "And she needed to hear it," Lydia answered. "Now she will be blamed for hearing it." "She is already being blamed for crying." Caleb's head lifted. "Where is she now?" "At my store," Lydia said. "In the back room. She is scared to go home, scared not to go home, scared of what people will say, and scared James will come back angrier because Harlan has filled him full of pride." Caleb moved toward the door. Clara turned. "Where are you going?" "To stand outside the mercantile a while." "No." He stopped. "You cannot fix every man's meanness by standing in front of a door," Clara said. "I was not meaning to fix it." What were you meaning? To make sure no one else breaks it. The answer settled into Clara's chest, in a place she did not want touched. Lydia watched them both, then looked down, giving them the kindness of pretending not to see too much. Clara reached for her shawl. I will come with you. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly. Mrs. Whitlow, that may put you right in the center of it. I am already in the center of it. She took the lantern from the window. The room darkened around the missing light. For 3 years, Clara had never carried that lantern farther than the porch. It had belonged to the window, to the small nightly ritual that kept Matthew and Annie from becoming only names carved in wood behind the church. Her hand trembled around the handle. Caleb saw the tremble and stepped back, not forward, leaving the choice entirely hers. Clara lifted the lantern higher. Lydia, walk beside me. Lydia nodded. Outside, the cold had deepened. The road lay damp and black, reflecting a thin line of lantern glow as the three of them moved toward town. Caleb walked a few paces behind the women, not hiding, not parading, simply there. Mercy Ridge noticed. Curtains shifted. A saloon door opened, spilling pipe smoke and yellow light into the street. 2 men on the boardwalk turned quiet as Clara passed with the lantern in her hand. She kept walking. Every step felt like taking back a part of her life people had treated as public property. Her grief, her window, her supper table, her name, her right to answer a frightened girl with the truth. At the Mercantile, Lydia unlocked the front door and led them through the dim store to the back room. Millie Dawes sat on a wooden crate near sacks of flour, her shawl clutched under her chin. Her eyes were swollen from crying. When she saw Clara, shame flooded her face. I am sorry, Millie whispered. I did not mean to bring trouble to your door. Clara set the lantern on a barrel. Its light spread across the flour dust, the shelves, the pale fear in Millie's face. You did not bring it, Clara said. It was already standing near you. You only named it. Millie pressed a hand to her mouth. Caleb stayed near the doorway, facing the store, giving the women privacy but keeping one ear on the street. Lydia crouched beside Millie. You can sleep here tonight. I have blankets. I cannot, Millie said. People will say I left him. People say many things, Lydia replied. Most of them are not worth freezing for. Millie looked at Clara. I do not know what to do. Clara sat across from her. The wood crate creaked softly under her weight. When she spoke, her voice was careful. She knew one sentence could become a rope around a young woman's heart if tied wrong. You do not have to decide your whole life tonight, Clara said. You only have to decide whether you are safe until morning. Millie's tears spilled again, but quieter this time. I thought marriage meant staying no matter what. My Matthew used to say marriage was not a locked door, Clara said softly. He said it was a porch light. Both people had to want to come home to it. The word surprised even Clara. She had not spoken Matthew's name in front of Caleb before, not like that, not in a room full of present trouble. Caleb's shoulders shifted near the doorway. He did not turn, but she knew he had heard. Millie lowered her face into her hands. For a while, no one tried to fill the room. Then a voice came from the store. Lydia. Harlan Pike. Millie jerked so hard the crate scraped the floor. Caleb moved first. He stepped into the store, closing the back room halfway behind him. Clara rose, but Lydia caught her wrist. Let him answer the door, Lydia whispered. Clara looked through the narrow gap. Harlan stood at the Mercantile entrance with 2 men behind him. He had not entered, but one boot rested on the threshold as if testing whether the room would yield. Caleb stood inside, hat in hand. The store is closed, Caleb said. Harlan smiled. Then what are you doing in it? Standing. That all you are good for? Most days. One of the men behind Harlan laughed under his breath, then stopped when Harlan glanced back. "I hear Mrs. Dawes is here," Harlan said. "Her husband has a right to know where his wife is." "Her husband rode north," Caleb answered, "and you are not him." Harlan's smile thinned. "You speak mighty free for a drifting hand." Caleb said nothing. Harlan looked past him, trying to see the back room. "Tell the widow this is not over. Mercy Ridge does not need women turning homes against themselves." From the back room, Clara felt something inside her go very still. She had endured whispers. She had endured pity. She had endured years of being treated like sorrow had made her half alive. But hearing Harlan use the word homes, as if fear belonged inside one, made her step forward. Lydia reached for her again, but Clara gently moved her hand away. She opened the back room door. Harlan's eyes lit with satisfaction when he saw her, as if he had pulled her exactly where he wanted. Clara walked past Caleb and stood in the lantern glow. "No," she said. Harlan blinked. "No what?" "No, you will not use that word in my hearing and pretend you care about it." The two men behind Harlan went quiet. Clara's voice did not rise, but every word was clear. "A home is not a place where a woman shakes when boots hit the porch. It is not a table where apologies are served after insults like they make a full meal. It is not a door a man locks with shame." Harlan's face darkened. "You best be careful." "I have been careful for 3 years," Clara said. "Careful with my name, careful with my grief, careful not to make other people uncomfortable because my family died and I kept breathing." The whole store seemed to hold still around her. Caleb turned his head slightly, watching her as if seeing a door open in a house he thought would stay closed forever. Clara looked straight at Harlan. "I am done being careful for men who count on silence." Harlan's jaw worked. For one breath, it looked as though he might step inside. Caleb did not move. He did not have to. The space between him and Harlan was quiet, but it was not empty. At last Harlan stepped back from the threshold. "This town will hear about this." Clara's hand tightened around the lantern handle. "Then tell it exactly," she said. Harlan gave a short, ugly laugh and turned away, his men following him into the dark street. The store remained silent after he left. Then, from somewhere beyond the shelves, Millie began to cry again. Not with panic this time, but with the weary relief of a person who had heard someone speak the words she had not been strong enough to say. Clara stood very still. The lantern flame moved softly in her hand. Caleb looked at her, and there was something in his eyes she had not seen before. Not pity, not worry. Respect. Deep, quiet respect. Lydia let out a long breath. "Well," she said, voice shaking just a little, "I suppose Mercy Ridge has its supper talk for the week." Caleb looked toward the street. "More than talk may come of it." Clara knew he was right. Harlan Pike had not walked away beaten. He had walked away planning. And as Clara carried the lantern back through the cold street later that night, with Caleb a few steps behind and Lydia at her side, she understood something with a chill that had nothing to do with November. Harlan had aimed at her reputation first. But next time, he would aim at the light itself. The next morning, Mercy Ridge woke with its doors half open, and its eyes turned toward Clara Whitlow's sewing shop. No bell had rung. No notice had been nailed to the church board. Yet every person in town seemed to know that something had shifted the night before at Lydia Marsh's mercantile. By breakfast, Harlan Pike's version of the story had already crossed the bakery, the livery, the feed office, and the back tables of the saloon. In his telling, Clara had marched into town with a lantern like a judge carrying fire. She had shamed a husband, hidden a runaway wife, and let a drifting cowboy stand guard as if Mercy Ridge were some lawless camp with no decent men left. By noon, he had added that Clara's grief had made her bitter. By supper, he had added that Caleb Rusk was not the quiet worker he seemed, but a man who had run from another county after ruining a boy's future in a horse race. That last piece reached Clara through Lydia, who arrived at the sewing shop just before dusk with flour on her sleeve and thunder in her face. "He is digging for anything that sounds like dirt," Lydia said, setting a parcel on Clara's worktable harder than necessary. "And if he cannot find enough, he will grind clean things into it." Clara did not look up from the hem she was stitching. "What did he say?" "That Caleb crippled a writer and fled with blood money." The needle stopped. Across the room, the lantern sat unlit in the window. The sky outside was still gray with late afternoon. Shadows lay along the porch rail like tired hands. Clara had not seen Caleb all day. "He told me about the race," she said. Lydia's expression changed. "He did." "Enough. Then you know Harlan is twisting it." "I know." But knowing did not keep the words from hurting. Not because she believed them, but because she knew what a town could do with a half-truth. A lie could be fought. A clean lie had edges. But a half-truth came wearing a familiar coat, and people welcomed it before they checked its face. Lydia moved closer. "Clara, you have to be careful now." Clara gave a faint, tired laugh. "I thought last night I announced I was done with that." "There is brave, and then there is standing in the road while a wagon comes." Clara pushed the needle through the cloth. "What would you have me do?" "Let folks cool. Keep your door locked for a few nights. Do not give Harlan another scene to use." Clara looked toward the window. For 3 years that lantern had been the one thing she did not let anyone touch. People could talk about her mourning. They could misunderstand it. They could grow tired of it. But the light itself remained hers. Now Harlan had dragged even that into the street. "Millie?" Clara asked. "In my back room still. She slept some, cried less this morning. I sent word to her aunt in Pine Hollow." "Good. James may come back before the aunt gets here." Clara tied off the thread and cut it. "Then James will need to decide what kind of man he wants to be before a whole town sees the answer." Lydia shook her head, but there was pride in her eyes. "You sound more like yourself than you have in years," she said. Clara lowered her gaze. That should have comforted her. Instead, it scared her. Because if this was herself, then where had she been all that time? Sitting behind a window with a lantern burning for the dead, while the living walked past and spoke softly around her. A knock sounded on the porch. Lydia turned. Clara knew the knock before she opened the door. One firm tap, then space, then another. A man asking, not taking. Caleb stood outside in the cold with his hat low in his hands. Dust darkened the knees of his trousers. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the weariness of a man who had heard his past spoken in uglier words than he had used himself. "Evening," he said. Clara stepped aside. "Come in." His gaze moved once to Lydia, then to the unlit lantern. "I should not stay long." "That is what people say when they already believe they are trouble," Lydia said. Caleb did not answer. Clara closed the door behind him. For a moment the three of them stood in the room with all the things no one had yet said. The work table, the thread, the smell of lamp oil and wool, the window waiting for its light. Caleb finally spoke. "I heard what Pike is saying." "So did we," Clara replied. "I came to tell you I will stop coming by." The words struck harder than Clara expected. Lydia's face tightened, but she stayed quiet. Caleb looked at Clara, steady and sorrowful. "Not because I want to. Because he has found something people can use against you, and it has my name tied to it." Clara's chin lifted. "You think leaving will make Harlan kinder?" "No. You think silence will make him honest." No. Then why say it? His hands closed around the brim of his hat. Because I know what it is to have a room turn when your name walks in, he said. I know how folks can look at you like one day is the whole of your life. I will not be the reason they do that to you. Clara felt anger rise. Not at him. For him. For herself. For every decent person who had stepped backward, because cruel people knew how to make goodness look shameful. You are not the reason, she said. Caleb's eyes held hers. Maybe not, but I am the tool he is using. Then do not hand yourself to him. The room went silent. Lydia looked between them, then reached for her shawl. I believe I will check on Millie. Clara glanced at her. Lydia gave a small nod that said she was leaving on purpose and would not apologize for it. Then she opened the door and stepped into the evening. The door closed. Caleb and Clara were alone. For a while neither moved. Outside, a wagon creaked somewhere down the road. A horse shook its harness. The last daylight faded from the window glass. Clara crossed to the shelf and took the matchbox. Caleb watched her. She opened it, removed one match, then stopped with it between her fingers. My daughter was afraid of storms, she said. Caleb's face softened. Clara looked at the lantern, not him. Annie would climb under the table if thunder rolled. Matthew used to light this lantern and put it right in the window. He told her a house with a brave light could not be swallowed by dark. Her mouth trembled once. The night after they buried them, I lit it because I did not know what else to do with my hands. Caleb said nothing. Clara struck the match. The small flame flared bright, then steadied. She lifted the glass and touched fire to wick. The lantern came alive in the window, filling the room with warm gold. For 3 years, she said, I thought I was keeping it lit for them. She turned to Caleb. Maybe I was also keeping one part of me alive in case someone came along who knew how to sit beside it without trying to blow it out. Caleb's breath caught so quietly she almost missed it. He looked away first, but not before she saw what her words had done. The careful guard in him had cracked, not broken, but opened enough for pain and hope to stand in the same place. Clara, he said softly. It was the first time he had spoken her name, without the shield of Mrs. Whitlow. The sound of it moved through her like a hand over still water. He seemed to realize it too, because he lowered his eyes. I do not want to bring harm to your door. You brought supper talk. Trouble was already in town. That almost earned a smile from him, but it faded quickly. There is more, Caleb said. Clara waited. The boy from the race. His name was Thomas Bell. I left money with his mother, but I never went back to face him after. I told myself leaving the circuit was payment enough. It was not. Clara's hand rested on the edge of the work table. Why tell me now? Because Pike may find the boy's name. He may bring it here, and if that happens, I would rather you hear the shame from me first. The lantern hissed softly. Clara studied Caleb's face, the scar near his jaw, the tired lines near his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed ready to accept whatever judgment she chose. You were careless, she asked. Yes. Proud. Yes. Cruel. His answer took longer. I do not know, he said. That is what has kept me moving. Clara felt the honesty of it. A cruel man would have defended himself. A proud man would have polished the story until it shone. Caleb stood there with the ugly part unwrapped, asking for no mercy he had not earned. She stepped closer, not enough to touch him, but enough that he had to look at her. Then stopped moving long enough to find out. His eyes met hers. Before he could answer, something struck the front window. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Clara flinched. Caleb moved in front of her before thought could catch him. The lantern shook on its hook, flame whipping inside the glass. A stone lay on the floor beneath the window, wrapped in paper. For several seconds, neither of them breathed. Then Caleb bent and picked it up. Clara saw the words before he could hide them. No widow's light for a drifter. Her face went pale. Caleb's jaw hardened. For the first time since she had known him, anger changed him visibly. Not wild anger, not loud, a colder thing held tight in both hands. He moved toward the door. Clara caught his sleeve. No. His body went still. Outside, hurried footsteps faded into the dark. Caleb looked at her hand on his sleeve, then at her face. "They came to your window," he said. "And if you chase them, Harlan gets the story he wants." His chest rose and fell once. Clara let go slowly. The lantern settled, the flame still alive. A small line of cracked glass marked the window pane, thin as a vein. Clara looked at it, then at the paper in Caleb's hand. Her fear was real. So was her anger. So was something else, something steadier than both. If you believe one act of kindness can change a life, stay with this story. Because sometimes the hardest part is not opening the door. It is keeping the light burning after someone tries to shame you for it. Caleb folded the paper once and set it on the table. "I will sleep on the porch tonight," he said. "No, you will not." "Clara." "No," her voice was firmer now. "You said you wanted to stop running. Then do not make my porch another place to hide from your own life." He stared at her. She took a breath. "Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to see Sheriff Cole." Caleb's brow tightened. "About the stone." "About the stone, about Harlan, about Millie, about all of it. Sheriff Cole owes Pike money." "I know." "Then he may do nothing." Clara looked at the lantern. The flame had steadied again. "Then he can do nothing in front of us." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Outside, Mercy Ridge lay dark and listening. Inside, Clara lifted the lantern from the window and carried it to the table, placing it between them like a small sun that refused to set. For the first time in 3 years, she did not leave the light in the window for the town to see. She kept it close. And Caleb Rusk stayed until dawn in the chair by the door, not as a guard, not as a secret, but as the first living soul Clara had trusted to share the dark. Morning came pale and hard over Mercy Ridge, with frost silvering the porch boards and the cracked window catching the first light like a thin scar. Clara had not slept. Neither had Caleb. He had spent the night in the chair near the door, coat still on, hat in his lap, his eyes opening every time the old shop wood gave a cold weather pop. Clara had sat at the work table with the lantern between them until the wick burned low. She stitched nothing. He spoke little, but the quiet was not empty. It held the stone, the note, the choice waiting for daylight. When the sun finally lifted beyond the ridge, Clara wrapped the stone and paper in a cloth, tied it with thread, and placed it in her basket. Her hands were steady. That steadiness worried Caleb more than shaking would have. "You are sure?" he asked. Clara took her shawl from the peg. "No." He looked at her. She tied the shawl beneath her chin. "But being afraid and being unsure are not reasons to let Harlan Pike decide where my light belongs." Caleb stood. His joints were stiff from the chair, but he hit it badly. The left side he favored gave a small pull when he reached for his coat. Clara noticed, "You are hurt." "It is old." "That does not answer me." "It answers enough for walking to the sheriff." She studied him in the gray morning. He looked tired but not weak. There was a strange peace in him too, as if staying through the night had cost him something and returned something else. Clara did not press. They stepped outside together. The town had not fully woken, but Mercy Ridge was never truly asleep when there was trouble to watch. Smoke rose from chimneys. A man sweeping the boardwalk outside the bakery slowed his broom. Two boys carrying milk pails stopped near the alley and stared. Across the road, Lydia Marsh stood in front of the mercantile with her arms folded tight against the cold. She did not call out. She only nodded. Clara nodded back. Caleb walked beside Clara, not behind her this time. He kept enough distance for respect, but close enough that every person looking could understand one thing plainly. He was not sneaking away from her door. The sheriff's office sat between the assay room and a closed barber shop. Sheriff Amos Cole was already inside, boots propped on the edge of his desk, reading a week-old newspaper with the seriousness of a man avoiding work. He lowered the paper when Clara entered. Then his eyes moved to Caleb, and a shadow of discomfort crossed his face. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, "Mr. Rusk." Clara set the wrapped cloth on his desk. The sheriff looked at it as though it might move. "What is this?" "Evidence," Clara said. Cole's eyebrows rose. "Evidence of what?" "Someone threw a stone through my window last night. The paper was wrapped around it." Caleb stood near the door, silent. Cole unfolded the cloth. He read the note. "No widow's light for a drifter." His mouth tightened, but not with outrage, with inconvenience. "Ugly thing," he said. "Yes," Clara replied. "I can ask around." "You can do more than ask." Cole leaned back. "Mrs. Whitlow, I understand you are upset." Clara's eyes sharpened. "Do not begin there." The sheriff paused. She placed both hands on the back of the chair in front of his desk. "I am not here to have my feelings weighed. I am here because a stone came through my window, and a man in this town has spent 2 days stirring others against me." "You mean Harlan Pike?" "I do." Cole glanced down at the note. "Do you have proof he threw it?" "No." "Then I cannot accuse a man without proof." Caleb spoke for the first time. "But you can warn him." Cole looked at him. "You best let me handle law in my town." Caleb's face did not change. "That is what we came to see you do." The room went quiet. Cole sat forward, boots dropping from the desk. "I know what people are saying. I know tempers are warm. Best thing for everyone is to let it cool." Clara gave a soft laugh with no humor in it. "That is what men always say when the fire is not burning their own door." Cole's cheeks reddened. "Now, Clara." "Mrs. Whitlow," she said. The correction hit the air like a snapped thread. Cole looked ashamed for half a second, then covered it with a sigh. "Mrs. Whitlow, Harlan does business with half this town. A public complaint could make matters worse." "For whom?" He did not answer. "For Millie Dawes?" Clara asked. "For Lydia, who took her in? For me, whose window was cracked? Or for you because Harlan Pike keeps his account at your brother's stable and his money in your poker games?" Cole stood, careful. "I have been told that word often." Caleb shifted, but Clara did not look back at him. She did not need him to rescue her from this conversation. She needed the truth to stand without leaning on a man. Sheriff Cole looked from her to Caleb, and then down at the note again. At last he said, "I will speak to Harlan." "When?" "Today. And you will write down that I came to you with this." Cole hesitated. Clara pushed the cloth closer to him. "Write it." The sheriff stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a ledger from his drawer, dipped his pen, and began. Clara watched every stroke. When it was done, she took the note back. Cole frowned. "I may need that." "You may copy the words. The stone and note remain mine until I trust where they are kept." For one brief moment, Caleb looked down to hide the faintest hint of pride. Outside, Mercy Ridge had grown busier. As Clara and Caleb stepped onto the boardwalk, two women across the street turned away too late. A man near the livery muttered something about widows and shame. Caleb heard it. Clara did too. She kept walking. But before they reached Lydia's mercantile, a wagon rolled fast around the corner. James Dawes was back. He pulled the horses up hard in front of the store, jumped down, and strode toward the door with his coat open and anger carrying him faster than sense. "Millie," he shouted. Lydia came out before he reached the handle. "Lower your voice. Get out of my way. She is not a sack of flour you left on a shelf." James's face twisted. "She is my wife." Clara stepped onto the street. "Then speak like she is a woman." James turned. The street slowed around them. Men paused near hitching posts. A store door opened. Someone inside the saloon laughed, then stopped. James pointed at Clara. "This is your doing." "No," Clara said. "Your choices are your doing." He took one step toward her. Caleb moved only half a step, but it was enough. James saw him. Harlan Pike emerged from the feed office then, as if he had been waiting for his cue. His hat sat low, his smile clean and empty. "Well now," Harlan called. "The widow brings her racer to the street." Caleb's jaw tightened. Clara felt the danger in that word, racer. Harlan had chosen it carefully, like a hook meant to tear old skin. James looked confused, but the watching men leaned in. Harlan stepped closer, voice louder. "Ask him, James. Ask the man standing beside your wife's new counselor how many lives he ruined before he came here to guard windows." Caleb said nothing. Clara did not look at him. She knew he was fighting himself, not Harlan. Harlan grinned. "No answer. That boy in Santa Loma did not get one either, from what I hear." A murmur went through the street. Clara turned to Caleb then. His face had gone pale beneath the sun, not from fear of Harlan, from memory. Harlan saw it and pressed harder. "Town ought to know what sort of man has been eating at Mrs. Whitlow's table." Clara stepped forward. "The town also ought to know what sort of man throws rumors where he cannot throw truth." Harlan's eyes flashed. "You accusing me of something?" "I am saying you speak like a man who needs others frightened to feel tall." A few people looked down. Harlan's smile disappeared. "You think that lantern makes you holy." Clara's hand closed around the basket handle. "No," she said, "it reminds me I survived." For once, Harlan had no quick answer. Then the mercantile door opened. Millie stepped out. She looked smaller than anyone remembered, wrapped in Lydia's shawl, face pale from crying and lack of sleep. But she walked onto the boardwalk on her own feet. James turned toward her. His anger faltered, confused by the sight of her not hiding. "Millie," he said, softer now. She stopped beside Lydia. "I will go to Aunt Rose in Pine Hollow for a while," she said. Her voice trembled, but it held. "You can write to me there when you can promise the house will be quiet without me making myself smaller to keep it that way." James stared as if she had spoken a foreign language. Harlan snapped, "Girl, do not make a fool of your husband in the street." Millie flinched. Clara saw it. So did half the town. A small silence spread. James looked from Millie to Harlan. Something slow and shameful moved across his face, like a man seeing his own reflection in another man's cruelty. "Do not speak to her," James said. Harlan's head turned. "What?" James swallowed. "Do not speak to my wife." The street changed again. Not enough for healing, not enough for trust, but enough to show a crack in Harlan's hold. Millie's lips parted. James looked at her, then down at his boots. "I do not know how to promise what you asked, not yet." His voice roughened. "But I know he has no right to answer for me." For the first time, Clara saw the boy in James, not only the anger. A frightened young husband raised by hard voices, almost becoming one. Millie's eyes filled, but she did not move toward him. "That is a start," Lydia said, "not a finish." James nodded once, ashamed. Harlan gave a cold laugh. Mercy Ridge has gone soft. Caleb finally spoke. "No," he said. "Maybe it is just tired of you mistaking loud for strong." The words were quiet, but they carried. Harlan turned on him. "And you know strength, do you, from a racetrack?" Caleb's face tightened, but this time he did not retreat into silence. "I know enough about pride to recognize it before it ruins more than one life." Harlan stepped close. "Say that again." Caleb held his ground. "No, you heard it the first time." The street held its breath. Sheriff Cole appeared at the edge of the boardwalk, likely drawn by the crowd. He looked at Clara, then at the gathered faces, then at Harlan. "Pike," he called, "a word." Harlan's mouth curled. "Later." "Now," Cole said. It was not brave, not yet, but it was public. And public mattered in a town that had been watching too long. Harlan looked around and saw, perhaps for the first time, that not every face was leaning his way. He stepped back. "This is not finished," he said. Clara believed him. He walked toward the sheriff with stiff shoulders, anger in every line of him. The crowd began to break apart, but not before Clara felt the weight of many eyes move from suspicion to uncertainty. That was not victory. It was only a door opened a crack. Millie went back inside with Lydia. James remained near his wagon, staring at the reins in his hands like he did not know yet whether he deserved to hold anything. Caleb stood beside Clara in the street. "You did not have to answer him," she said. "Yes," Caleb replied, "I did." She looked at him. He met her gaze, tired but clear. "I have let other men tell that story too long." The wind moved down the road, lifting dust around their boots. For a moment Clara wanted to reach for his hand. She did not there, not under all those windows. But Caleb looked down, as if he had felt the thought pass between them anyway. Then a boy came running from the east road, breathless, waving his cap. "Mrs. Whitlow," he shouted, "your shop." Clara turned cold. The boy stopped in front of her, gasping. "Smoke coming from the back. I saw it from the livery yard." Caleb was already moving. Clara ran after him, basket swinging from her arm, heart beating hard enough to hurt. As they rounded the bend toward the edge of town, she saw it. A thin gray ribbon rising from behind her sewing shop. And in the front window, through the cracked glass, the place where the lantern should have been was dark. Caleb reached the sewing shop before Clara did. By the time she came around the last bend, breath tearing in her chest, he had already kicked open the back gate and was hauling a smoking feed sack away from the rear wall. A bitter smell hung in the air. Not a full fire. Not yet, but close enough that Clara's knees nearly gave under her. The smoke came from a pile of oily rags and scrap leather stacked against the back boards. Someone had placed them there. Someone had meant for the dry wall to catch. Caleb threw the smoking bundle into the dirt and stamped it hard beneath his boot. The heel of his old boot came down again and again until the glow died. Then he grabbed the water bucket near the pump and flung it across the blackened boards. Steam rose. Clara stopped at the back corner of the shop, one hand pressed to her ribs. For a moment she could not move. All she saw was the dark mark crawling up the wall, the smoke, the back window clouded, and the small linta where she stored finished work for customers. A child's coat, a wagon cover, Millie's torn shirt still waiting for its last stitch. Things people had trusted her to repair. Not ruined. Almost. That word hurt worse than burned. Almost was the line she had lived on for years. Almost saved, almost healed, almost ready to stop hiding, almost safe enough to open her door. Caleb turned toward her. "Clara." She heard him, but the sound came from far away. Lydia and the boy arrived next, then Sheriff Cole, then half of Mercy Ridge, all drawn by the smoke and running feet. People gathered near the road, whispering in tight, frightened voices. A few men brought buckets too late and stood holding them, ashamed of arriving after the danger had passed. Clara walked to the back wall. The boards were scorched but still firm. She touched one with 2 fingers. It left black on her skin. Sheriff Cole crouched near the dead bundle. He lifted one of the rags with a stick, then looked around. "Oiled," he said. Caleb's voice was flat. "Yes." Cole looked at the ground. "Tracks here." Clara looked down. Boot prints marked the damp dirt near the fence. One set came in from the alley, stopped by the back wall, then went out the same way. Not Caleb's, not hers, not a passing child's. Deliberate. Cole followed the tracks to the alley entrance, his face growing harder with every step. By the gate, caught on a splinter of wood, hung a torn thread of dark green cloth. Lydia's eyes narrowed when she saw it. "Harlan Pike wore a green coat this morning," she said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Cole took the thread carefully. No one said what everyone was thinking, because saying a thing out loud made it a duty. Clara turned toward the front of the shop. "The lantern." She walked fast, pushing through the side door. Caleb followed but stopped at the threshold. Inside, the sewing room was dim. The front window was cracked from last night's stone. The hook where the lantern usually hung was empty because she had kept it at the table through the night and left it there before going to the sheriff. The lantern still sat on the worktable, safe. Its glass smudged with soot from the low wick, but unbroken. Clara put both hands on it. Only then did the shaking begin. It started in her fingers and moved up her arms. She gripped the lantern handle harder, but that made it worse. A sound broke out of her, small and angry, not quite a sob and not quite a breath. Caleb stepped into the room. He did not touch her. He stood a few feet away, close enough that she did not feel alone, far enough that her grief did not feel trapped. "He tried to burn it," she whispered. "The shop," Caleb said gently. Clara shook her head. "No, not just the shop." Her eyes lifted to his. "He tried to burn the place where Matthew laughed, where Annie sat under the table during storms, where I learned how to breathe after they were gone." Her voice cracked. "He tried to make me afraid of my own light." Caleb's face changed. The anger in him was there, but beneath it was something deeper, something like sorrow for every inch of meaning a cruel man could not understand but still knew how to wound. From outside came Sheriff Cole's voice, sharper now, telling people to stand back. Lydia was arguing with someone at the gate. A horse moved in the road. Clara closed her eyes. For one moment she saw Annie at 6 years old, bare feet tucked beneath her nightdress, holding a storybook upside down and pretending she could read. Matthew laughing softly, taking the book, making his voice slow and grand for every little sentence. The lantern between them, the house alive. Then fever. Then dirt. Then 3 years of flame against glass. Her eyes opened. She lifted the lantern. Caleb watched her carefully. "What are you doing?" Clara walked to the front window and placed the lantern back on its hook. Daylight still filled the room. There was no need to light it. But she took a match from the box anyway. Her fingers trembled so hard the first match broke. Caleb's hand moved half an inch, then stopped. He let her try again. The second match struck. Flame bloomed. Clara lit the wick in the middle of the afternoon. The glow was small against the pale day, but it was there. Outside, the crowd quieted as people saw it through the cracked glass. Lydia stopped speaking. Sheriff Cole turned. Even the men with buckets lowered their hands. Clara stood in the window beside the burning lantern, soot on her fingers, smoke still rising behind the shop. And for the first time, Ridge saw the widow not as a sorrowful woman to pity, and not as a scandal to whisper over. They saw a woman who had been pushed to the edge of her grief and had chosen to keep standing. Caleb looked at her from inside the room. Something moved through his face that he did not try to hide this time: fear for her, respect, and something warmer than both. Sheriff Cole entered through the side door. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, quieter than before, "I am going to bring Harlan Pike in for questioning." Clara did not look away from the lantern. Questioning. Cole's jaw tightened. If the tracks match and someone saw him near the alley, more than questioning. And if no one speaks? Cole looked toward the crowd outside. Then this town will have to decide how much cowardice it can live with. It was the first strong thing Clara had heard him say. She turned then. "Sheriff, this town has lived with more than it admits." Cole accepted the blow. Maybe so. A commotion rose from the road. Caleb moved to the window. Harlan Pike was coming down the street on horseback, slow as Sunday, wearing the same green coat Lydia had named. He did not look like a man fleeing guilt. He looked like a man coming to admire his own work. His horse stopped in front of the shop. Harlan looked at the scorched back wall, the gathered crowd, Sheriff Cole at the door, and finally Clara in the window beside the lit lantern. For a heartbeat, surprise crossed his face. Then he smiled. "Well," he called, "I heard there was smoke. Thought the widow finally set her sorrow too close to the curtains." A few people gasped. Caleb's hands closed slowly at his sides. Clara stepped out onto the porch before anyone could stop her. The lantern burned behind her in the window. Harlan tipped his hat. "Careful, Mrs. Whitlow, you look troubled. Folks may start wondering if all this attention has unsettled you." Sheriff Cole came down the steps. "Harlan, get off the horse." Harlan's smile faded. "For what reason?" "Because I am asking." "That is not a reason." Cole held up the torn green thread. "This was found on her back gate." Harlan looked at it, then at his coat. "Plenty of green cloth in this town." "Then you will not mind answering questions." Harlan's eyes turned cold. "You want to drag me in because a lonely widow and her stray cowboy need a villain." The words struck the crowd, but not as sharply as they would have the day before. Too much had happened in front of too many eyes. Millie appeared at Lydia's side near the mercantile, pale but watching. James Dawes stood a few feet behind her, hat in hand, shame still hanging over him like wet wool. The baker, the livery boy, Reverend Bell, two ranch hands, women with shawls pulled tight, men who had muttered yesterday and now stared at their boots. Harlan saw the faces and grew louder. "Ask the cowboy what he knows about ruining lives," he called. "Ask him why a man with his name runs from county to county." Caleb stepped onto the porch beside Clara. "No more running," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried down the street. Harlan laughed. "That's so." Caleb looked at the crowd, not Harlan. "I rode races. I rode proud. A young man named Thomas Bell got hurt in Santa Loma because I cared more about winning than what was happening beside me. I did not strike him. I did not push him. But I saw danger and chose the line anyway." A hush fell. Clara watched him. This was not a confession dragged out by shame. It was a man opening the locked room of his past before someone else could set fire to it. "I left money," Caleb said. "Then I left town. That was the coward's part, not the race, not even the pride, leaving without facing what my pride had cost." His throat moved. "I have carried that since. Pike did not find a secret, he found an old wound. There is a difference. No one spoke. Harlan shifted in the saddle, angry that the weapon had been taken from his hand. Caleb turned to him. You want to use that boy against me? Fine. I will write Santa Loma today and ask Thomas Bell to come here or send word. Let my past stand in daylight. Then Caleb looked at the scorched back wall. Will yours? That landed. Harlan's horse tossed its head as his hand tightened on the reins. Sheriff Cole stepped closer. Get down. For 1 second, it seemed Harlan might obey. Then he wheeled the horse hard toward the east road. Move, Cole shouted. Caleb jumped from the porch, but Harlan was already tearing past the livery. James Dawes moved without thinking. He grabbed a loose hitch rope from the post and threw it across the road, not to catch the horse's legs, but to startle it sideways. The horse reared, not falling, only stopping hard enough that Harlan lost his seat and hit the dirt with a cry. No blood, no broken bones, only pride knocked into mud. 2 men rushed forward and held him before he could rise. Sheriff Cole reached him, breathing hard. Harlan Pike, he said, voice loud enough for the whole street, you are coming with me. Harlan fought with words, not strength now. He cursed Clara's name, called Caleb a drifter, called the town fools. But the town did not move aside for him. That was new. As Cole led him away, Harlan twisted back toward Clara. You think this ends it, he shouted. You think a lantern and a sad story make you clean. Clara stood on the porch, soot still on her fingers. No, she said, but truth is cleaner than fear. The crowd heard her. Caleb heard her. Most of all, Clara heard herself. When Harlan disappeared into the sheriff's office, the street stayed quiet. People did not know whether to cheer, apologize, or return to their lives as if they had not nearly watched a woman's whole world burn. Lydia crossed the road first. She climbed the porch steps and took Clara's blackened hand in both of hers. I am sorry, Lydia whispered. For what? For all the years we thought leaving you alone was the same as letting you heal. Clara's eyes filled. She looked past Lydia at the crowd. Some faces turned away, some stayed. Millie stepped forward and said, I will speak to the sheriff. I heard Harlan tell James that some women need darkness to remember their place. James closed his eyes in shame. Then he opened them. I heard it too. One by one, small truths began to step into the open. Not grand, not perfect, but enough. Clara looked back through the window at the lantern burning in daylight. The flame was small. The whole town could see it now. And Caleb, standing just below the porch, looked at Clara as if the road behind him had finally come to an end. But before either of them could speak, Sheriff Cole's deputy came running from the office, face pale. Caleb Rusk, he called. Caleb turned. The deputy held a folded telegram in his hand. Wire just came in from Santa Loma. It is about Thomas Bell. The street went still again. Caleb's face lost color. Clara stepped down from the porch. The past he had just invited into daylight had arrived faster than anyone expected. And as the telegram trembled in the deputy's hand, Clara knew the fire behind her shop had not been the only thing that could still change everything. The telegram looked too small to carry the weight Caleb saw in it. It was only folded paper in the deputy's hand, cream-colored and creased, with dust along one edge where it had been carried too fast from the office. But Caleb stared at it as if it were a loaded rifle pointed at the center of his chest. No one in the street moved. The scorched boards behind Clara's shop still smoked faintly in the cold air. Harlan Pike was locked in the sheriff's office. The crowd that had gathered for one kind of trouble now held its breath for another. Clara stepped closer to Caleb. She did not touch him, not in front of all those eyes, but she stood near enough that he could feel her there. The deputy swallowed. "Sheriff said I should bring it straight over. It came through before we got Harlan inside." Caleb took the telegram. For a moment, he did not open it. His fingers pressed against the fold, and Clara saw how white his knuckles had gone. This was not fear of punishment. Caleb had already punished himself for years. This was fear of finding out that the story he had carried was worse than memory had allowed him to know. Lydia came to stand beside Clara. Millie stayed near the mercantile, one hand on the post, watching with wide, worried eyes. James Dawes stood a few steps away from his wife, not close enough to claim forgiveness, not far enough to pretend he did not care. Caleb unfolded the telegram. His eyes moved across the words. Then once more. His face changed so little that only Clara, who had spent evenings learning the small weather of his silence, saw the blow land. "What does it say?" Sheriff Cole asked from the road, having returned from locking Harlan away. Caleb did not answer. The paper lowered a little in his hand. Clara's voice softened. "Caleb." He looked at her then, and the shame in his eyes had shifted into something more painful. Hoping. That somehow hurt worse. He handed her the telegram. Clara read it carefully. "Thomas Bell alive. Works with father near Santa Loma. Walks with limp but rides again. Says if Caleb Rusk asks, he should stop running from a race Thomas quit blaming him for years ago. Mother kept the money. It saved their farm." Clara read the words twice. The town waited. Wind moved down the road, carrying the smell of smoke and damp earth. A horse stamped near the livery. Somewhere a door creaked open, then stopped. Clara looked up. "He is alive," she said. A murmur passed through the crowd. Caleb closed his eyes. The breath that left him did not sound like relief at first. It sounded like something old breaking. Not loudly, not completely. Just a deep crack inside a man who had built his life around carrying a burden heavier than the truth. Sheriff Cole took off his hat. "Well," he said quietly, "that is something." Caleb opened his eyes and looked toward the east road. Not at anyone, not at anything Mercy Ridge could see. "I made myself the whole villain," he said. Clara held the telegram against her chest. "You made yourself the only one who had to remember." His mouth tightened. "I should have gone back." "Yes," she said. The honesty made several people glance at her, but Caleb did not look wounded by it. He looked steadier. Clara took one step closer. But leaving was the wrong part, not living after it. Those words reached him. His eyes moved to hers, and for a moment the crowd, the smoke, the town, even Harlan's poison fell away. There was only Caleb Rusk standing in the road with his past opened in his hands, and Clara Whitlow holding a lantern-lit truth between them. Lydia cleared her throat softly. Maybe this town ought to hear the whole wire. Clara looked at Caleb, asking without words. He nodded once. She read the telegram aloud. Not loudly, not like a performance, just clear enough for Mercy Ridge to hear what Harlan had tried to twist into a weapon. When she finished, the street stayed silent for a long moment. Then Reverend Bell, who had said very little through all of it, stepped forward. "Mr. Rusk," he said, "a man who carries guilt too long can start believing it is the same as repentance." Caleb looked down. The Reverend continued, "But if that boy says to stop running, you would do well to consider that mercy sometimes comes late because we took the long road away from it." No one spoke. Caleb folded the telegram slowly and placed it inside his coat. "I will write him," he said, "not to excuse, to thank him, and to tell him I am sorry like I should have done before." Clara felt something inside her ease. Not all the way, nothing real healed all at once, but enough that the air seemed to loosen around them. Then from the sheriff's office came the sound of Harlan Pike shouting. The crowd turned. His voice carried through the closed door, sharp and furious. You cannot hold me on a thread and a widow's tears. Sheriff Cole's jaw hardened. I can hold you on attempted burning if the tracks match, the cloth matches, and witnesses remember what they heard. Harlan shouted again, but the words blurred behind the walls. Cole turned to the gathered town. So I will ask plainly, did anyone see Harlan Pike near Mrs. Whitlow's alley this morning? At first, no one answered. The old fear returned like cold fog. Faces lowered. Men shifted their boots. Women looked at one another. The town had found courage while Harlan was falling, but courage often shrank when it had to sign its name. Clara looked at the scorched wall. She did not blame them completely. Fear had roots, she knew that. But roots could choke a town if nobody pulled. Then Millie stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice held. I saw him near the alley. James looked at her, startled. Millie swallowed. I was upstairs in Lydia's store this morning. I could see down past the livery. I saw Mr. Pike walking behind the shop with something under his coat. Sheriff Cole turned. Will you write that down? Millie's hand trembled on the post. James stepped nearer, but stopped before touching her. You do not have to, he said softly. Millie looked at him. There was no anger in his face now, only shame and worry. I know, she said. Then she looked back at the sheriff. I will. A small sound moved through the crowd, like people beginning to breathe again. The livery boy raised his hand next. I saw smoke first, but before that I saw Mr. Pike's horse tied behind the feed office instead of out front. Thought it was odd. A baker's wife spoke from near the boardwalk. He bought lamp oil yesterday evening, said his storeroom lamp was empty, but he had just bought oil 2 days before. One of Harlan's own men, the younger one who had stood behind him at the mercantile, removed his hat. He told us last night that some lights are better put out, the man said, voice low. I thought he meant gossip, I swear I did. Sheriff Cole looked at him. You will write that too. The man nodded. One by one, not many, but enough, Mercy Ridge began to give back the truth it had been holding. Clara listened, her heart aching in a way she could not name. It was not happiness, not victory. It was the strange sorrow of realizing how many people had seen pieces of harm and waited for someone else to hold them first. Caleb stood beside her, quiet, but his face was different now. The telegram had not made him light, it had made him present. Harlan's locked door rattled once as he kicked it from inside. Sheriff Cole gave the office a tired look. He can kick until supper. That earned a nervous laugh from someone, then another. The sound did not last long, but it mattered. Lydia stepped onto Clara's porch and looked at the cracked window. This will need repair. Clara looked at the thin break in the glass. Yes. I have a spare pane in the back of the store. Not perfect size, but close. The frame is old. I know. Caleb looked at the window. I can set it before dark. Clara glanced at him. You fix glass now. No, he said, but I can learn before dark if someone tells me when I am doing it wrong. Lydia's mouth twitched. That, Mr. Rusk, is the foundation of most useful men. For the first time since morning, Clara laughed. It was small, it broke halfway through, but it was real. Several people heard it, and something gentle passed over their faces. Perhaps they remembered that Clara had once laughed often. Perhaps they were ashamed they had let grief become the only thing they saw in her. The crowd slowly began to thin. Sheriff Cole led Millie, James, the livery boy, and the others toward his office to write their statements. Reverend Bell stayed to help carry the burned scraps away. Lydia marched to her store for the glass pane as if going to war with the window itself. And Caleb remained at the porch steps with Clara. The two of them stood without speaking for a while. The lantern still burned inside the shop, though the afternoon sun made its light faint. Behind the shop, smoke had faded to a smell. The black mark on the wall remained. Clara looked at it and then at Caleb. "You should go to Santa Loma someday," she said. He nodded slowly. "I know." "Not today." "No. Not because you are running." His eyes warmed with quiet understanding. "No, because there is glass to fix." She looked away before the smile could become too tender. Caleb stepped up onto the porch. "Clara." She turned. He seemed to weigh her name before letting it go again. "When that wire came, I thought it might tell me Thomas was dead. I thought it might put a period on the worst thing I believed about myself. And it did not." "No." His hand moved to the pocket where the telegram rested. "But it did something I do not quite know how to carry yet." "What?" "It gave me back the rest of my life." Clara's throat tightened. She looked through the window at the lantern. "That is not an easy gift." "No," he said, "but I think maybe a man ought to stop refusing it just because he does not feel worthy the moment it is handed to him." Clara met his eyes. Something passed between them then, quiet and steady. Not a promise, not yet, something more honest than that. A beginning both of them were afraid to name. If you are still here with Clara and Caleb, tell me this in the comments. Do you think forgiveness means forgetting the past, or finally facing it without letting it own you? By late afternoon, the window frame had been pulled apart, the cracked glass removed, and Lydia's spare pane trimmed down with more hope than skill. Caleb cut his thumb once and tried to hide it. Clara caught his hand, wrapped it with a strip of clean cloth, and tied the knot tighter than necessary. He looked down at her bent head. For a moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath. Then she released his hand and went back to the work table. Neither spoke of it. But after the pane was fitted and the last sliver of daylight faded behind the ridge, Clara lifted the lantern from the table and carried it to the window. She paused with it in both hands. Caleb stood near the door, ready to leave, hat already in hand. Clara looked at the new glass. The faint mark of smoke still clung to the back wall. The town beyond the window glowed with early lamplight. Not all faces were kind. Not all hearts had changed. Harlan still sat angry in a cell. The future still held more trouble than peace. But the window was whole. And so was the flame. Clara hung the lantern on its hook and lit it. The light filled the new pane cleanly. Caleb watched from behind her. This time, the lantern was not only for Matthew and Annie. It was not only for grief. It was for a woman who had walked into the street carrying her own sorrow and had come back with her head high. It was for a cowboy who had stopped running long enough to receive a mercy he never expected. It was for a town learning, late and awkwardly, that silence could be as harmful as fire. Clara turned from the window. Caleb stood with his hat against his chest. "I should ride back before it gets too late," he said, though neither of them believed he wanted to. Clara opened her mouth to answer. But before she could speak, a horse came hard down the east road. Both of them heard it. Fast. Too fast for peace. Caleb stepped onto the porch. Clara followed. The rider pulled up in front of the shop, breath steaming in the cold dusk. It was Deputy Harlan from Pine Hollow, coat dusty, face grave. "Looking for Sheriff Cole," he said, "and a woman named Clara Whitlow." Clara's hand tightened around the doorframe. "I am Clara." The deputy removed his hat. "I came about Harlan Pike," he said. "There is something your town does not know. He is not just a cattle buyer." Caleb moved one step closer to Clara. The deputy looked toward the sheriff's office, then back at her. He has been running widows off small claims for 2 years. And Mrs. Whitlow, your shop land sits on a deed he has been trying to get his hands on since before your husband died. The words seemed to pull the cold straight through Clara's coat. Her shop land. The deed. Since before Matthew died. For a moment, the porch, the lantern, the newly fixed window, even Caleb standing beside her all slipped into a strange distance. Clara heard the deputy's voice, but she was no longer hearing only him. She was hearing Matthew 3 years ago, coughing at the kitchen table with fever in his bones, telling her to keep the deed papers safe in the lower drawer. Back then, she had thought he was worried about bills. Now she wondered what he had known. Caleb looked at the deputy from Pine Hollow. Say that again. The deputy turned his hat in both hands. Name is Eli Mercer. I have been tracking complaints across 3 towns. Harlan Pike buys small debts, pressures widows or older homesteaders, then claims unpaid notes or clouded deeds. Folks get scared. Land changes hands quiet. Clara's hand moved to the doorframe. My husband bought this place legal. I believe you, Deputy Mercer said. That may be why Pike never came straight at you. He needed your reputation broken first. A woman no one trusts is easier to push in court. Caleb's jaw tightened. Clara looked toward the sheriff's office at the far end of town. Harlan sat behind those walls, but suddenly the cell felt too small for all he had done. The deputy continued. Your name came up in Pine Hollow through your aunt's old neighbor. Said a Pike man had asked questions about Matthew Whitlow's parcel after his passing. Then I heard a wire about trouble here and rode over. Clara swallowed. I have no aunt in Pine Hollow. Deputy Mercer frowned. A woman named Rose Whitlow. That is Millie Dawes' aunt, Caleb said. A new fear touched Clara's heart. Millie. They did not wait. Caleb was already down the porch steps. Clara followed, carrying the lantern without thinking. Deputy Mercer moved beside them, and together they walked fast toward Lydia's mercantile. The town had settled into dusk, but too many windows were still lit. People had seen the Pine Hollow deputy arrive. Whispers traveled faster than horses when fear gave them a saddle. At the mercantile, Lydia opened the door before they knocked. I saw the writer, she said. What now? Where is Millie? Clara asked. In the back with James and Sheriff Cole. They were writing statements. Deputy Mercer's face hardened. Sheriff Cole is here. No, he took the statements to his office 10 minutes ago. Clara pushed past the flour sacks toward the back room. Millie sat on a chair with a blanket around her shoulders. James stood near the wall, arms folded, face drawn with worry. He looked like a man still learning that remorse did not repair a thing the moment it appeared. Millie stood when she saw Clara. What happened? Clara tried to soften her voice. Deputy Mercer came from Pine Hollow. He mentioned your Aunt Rose. Millie went pale. My aunt. The deputy stepped forward. Ma'am, did anyone ask your aunt about Mrs. Whitlow's land? Millie's lips parted. She looked at James, then at Lydia. I do not know, she said. But yesterday morning, before James rode north, Mr. Pike told him my aunt had no room for foolish wives, and that I would not find shelter there long. James lifted his head sharply. He said what? Millie's eyes filled with pain. You were angry. You did not hear half of what he said. James flinched as if struck. Deputy Mercer looked grim. Pike knew where you might run. He may have planned to reach your aunt before you did. Why? Lydia asked. To close off safe doors, Clara said quietly. Everyone turned to her. She knew it with sudden clarity. Harlan did not only burn buildings. He burned paths. He made women feel alone, then offered them fear as if it were the only road left. Millie sat down slowly. James went to her, stopped, and looked at his own hands before lowering them. "Millie, I am sorry." She did not answer. This was not the moment for easy forgiveness, and to his credit, James did not ask for it. Caleb looked at Deputy Mercer. If Pike is working land papers, where would he keep them? At his office, maybe, or with a man who draws papers for him. Lydia's eyes narrowed, or with Silas Trent. Clara turned. "The notary." Lydia nodded. "He has a room behind the assay office, does bills of sale, deeds, loan notes. I never trusted the way his ink dries too fast." Deputy Mercer looked toward the street. "Is he still open?" "Not at this hour," Lydia said, "but his lamp burns late when he has private business." Caleb stepped toward the door. "Then we go there." Clara caught his sleeve. This time, not to stop him in fear, but to make him look at her before he ran ahead of the truth. "We go with the sheriff." Deputy Mercer gave a dry look. "If your sheriff is tied to Pike, he may slow us." "He may," Clara said. "But if we go without him, Pike says we broke into a lawful office." Caleb nodded once. "She is right." Lydia reached for her coat. "I am coming too." "So am I," Millie said. James turned to her. "Millie, you do not have to." "I know," her voice shook but her eyes did not. "That is why I am coming." They found Sheriff Cole outside his office, standing under the dim porch lamp with a folded statement in his hand. Through the window behind him, Harlan Pike sat in the cell, hat off, hair rough, eyes bright with hatred. Cole looked at the group approaching and seemed to understand, with visible regret, that his quiet evening had ended. Deputy Mercer introduced himself and explained in short, firm words. The sheriff's face grew heavier with each sentence. Cole looked toward Harlan through the window. "Pike, you know a Silas Trent." Harlan's smile showed through the bars. "Half the county knows Trent." "Did he prepare papers on Mrs. Whitlow's land?" Harlan leaned back. "A man can ask about land, not a crime." Clara stepped close to the window. Harlan's eyes moved to the lantern in her hand, and his mouth twisted. "You are running out of darkness," Clara said. For the first time, his smile faltered. Sheriff Cole turned to Deputy Mercer. "We need a warrant." Mercer looked at him. "And how long will that take?" "Judges 3 towns over." Caleb's face darkened. "By then Trent can burn every paper in that room." Lydia crossed her arms. "Not if someone asks him politely while half the town watches." Everyone looked at her. She shrugged. "Men who work crooked hate witnesses more than questions." It was the first plan they had that did not need a locked door broken. Within 20 minutes, the boardwalk outside Silas Trent's little office was crowded. Not shouting, not rushing, just standing. Reverend Bell came. The baker and his wife came. The livery boy came with his father. Even 2 men who had laughed with Harlan earlier in the week stood at the back, heads low. Lydia knocked first. No answer. Sheriff Cole knocked second. "Silas, open up." Inside, something thumped. Caleb's eyes sharpened. Deputy Mercer moved to the side window. "Lamp is lit." Cole knocked again. "Open the door, or I open it for you and explain later." A chair scraped. At last, Silas Trent opened the door a hand's width. He was a thin man with ink on his fingers and fear on his upper lip. "Sheriff, this is irregular." "So is smoke behind a widow's shop," Lydia said from behind him. Trent's eyes flicked to Clara. That little glance gave away too much. Cole saw it too. "We have questions about land papers concerning Clara Whitlow's property." "I cannot discuss private business." Deputy Mercer stepped forward. "Fraud is not private business." Trent tried to close the door. Caleb put one hand flat against it. "Not hard. Just enough." Trent looked up at him and changed his mind. The office smelled of ink, dust, and hot lamp oil. Papers lay on the desk in two neat stacks. A small iron stove glowed in the corner. Beside it sat a metal tray with curled black ashes. Clara saw the ashes and stopped breathing. Deputy Mercer crossed the room and lifted the tray. "What did you burn?" "Old drafts," Trent said quickly. "Of what?" No answer. Lydia moved behind the desk before Trent could stop her. "Sheriff, bottom drawer." Cole opened it. Inside were folded papers tied with twine. He lifted the top packet and read the label. "Whitlow Parcel, East Road." Clara's knees weakened. Caleb stepped close behind her, but did not touch unless she asked. Cole opened the packet. His face changed from suspicion to anger. "These are lien papers," he said. "I never signed a lien," Clara said. Trent licked his lips. "Your husband did." "No," she said at once. Everyone turned. Clara did not know how she knew so fully, until the answer came through her like a bell. "Matthew would have told me. He told me where the deed was. He told me to keep the lower drawer locked. He was sick and still made me promise." Trent's eyes went to the stove. Caleb saw it. He crossed to the iron stove and used the poker to pull open the small side grate. A half-burned paper clung inside, black around the edges but not gone. Deputy Mercer took it carefully with the poker and laid it on the desk. The lower half remained readable. Matthew Whitlow's name. A false signature. A date from 2 days after Matthew had been buried. The room fell silent. Clara stared at the paper. The world narrowed until she could hear only the lantern handle creaking softly in her grip. 2 days after the burial. While she had been sitting at her table, unable to swallow soup, unable to remember whether morning or evening had come, Harlan Pike and Silas Trent had begun trying to steal the ground beneath her grief. Caleb spoke first, voice low. "You forged a dead man's name." Trent's face collapsed. "Pike said she would sell eventually. He said no one would check. I only wrote what he told me." Sheriff Cole looked sick. Deputy Mercer pulled a notebook from his coat. "Say that again." Trent began to tremble. "I want protection." Lydia laughed once, sharp and cold. "From the widow whose land you tried to steal or the man you helped?" Trent sank into the chair. Clara placed the lantern on the desk. Its light fell over the forged paper, Matthew's false name, the burned edges. She did not cry. Not yet. Her sorrow had gone too deep for tears to reach. "Write it down," she said. Deputy Mercer looked at her. "All of it," Clara said. "His confession, Pike's name, the forged paper, the burned drafts. Write it while the ink is still afraid." For the next hour, Silas Trent talked. He told them Pike had watched Clara's shop since Matthew died. The East Road was going to matter more once the new freight line came through. Pike had planned to buy up land cheap before others knew. Clara's parcel sat where wagons would turn, rest, and water horses. A mending shop today could be a freight office tomorrow. He told them Pike spread talk because no judge listened closely to a woman. The town already doubted. He told them the stone was meant to scare her into leaving. The fire was meant to finish what fear had not. With every word, Clara felt pieces of her last 3 years rearrange into something uglier and clearer. Harlan had not only hated her strength. He had wanted her ground. When Trent signed the statement, his hand shook so hard the letters crawled. Sheriff Cole folded the papers and handed them to Deputy Mercer. "I failed this town," Cole said quietly. Lydia crossed her arms. "Yes." No one softened it. Cole nodded as if he deserved that. "Then I start by not failing the next hour." They returned to the sheriff's office with the papers wrapped tight and half of Mercy Ridge following in solemn silence. Inside the cell, Harlan stood when he saw them. His eyes went to Trent first, then to the packet in Deputy Mercer's hand. His face changed. Not much, but enough for Clara to know he understood. The truth had found the door. Cole unlocked the outer office and stepped in. "Harlan Pike, you are being held for attempted arson, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to steal land." Harlan gripped the bars. "You cannot prove a thing." Deputy Mercer laid the forged paper on the desk. Silas Trent stood behind them, pale as flour. Harlan looked at him with pure hatred. Trent looked at the floor. Clara stepped forward, lantern in hand. Harlan's gaze snapped to her. "You think you won?" "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the room seemed to make space for it. "I think Matthew kept his promise better than you kept your lies." Harlan's eyes narrowed. Clara lifted the lantern slightly. "He told me where the deed was. He told me to keep the drawer locked. Even dying, he was still trying to bring me home safe." For the first time since she had known Harlan Pike, he had nothing ready to say. Caleb stood behind Clara, eyes steady on the man in the cell. Harlan tried one last smile. "And what about your cowboy? You think a man like that stays? Men with roads in them always leave." The words entered the room like a cold draft. Clara did not turn to Caleb. She did not need to. But Caleb stepped beside her. "No," he said. "Some men only keep riding because they have not found a place honest enough to stop." Harlan laughed weakly. "And this is it." Caleb looked at Clara, then at the lantern, then back at Harlan. "It could be." The words were not loud. They were not a proposal. But Clara felt them land with all the weight of a man putting his life down where others could see it. A quiet warmth rose behind her pain. Not enough to erase the day. Enough to keep her standing. Sheriff Cole ordered Harlan moved at first light to Pine Hollow, where a circuit judge could hold him. Deputy Mercer would ride with them. Trent would remain under guard. Statements would be sent. Deeds checked. Other widows named in the papers would be notified. Justice, Clara realized, was not one ringing bell. It was 100 slow steps taken after the truth came out. By the time Clara and Caleb walked back to the shop, the town had emptied into night. Lydia stayed behind to watch Millie and give James no chance to make promises too quickly. Reverend Bell had offered to sit near the sheriff's office until dawn. Men who had once looked away now stood guard without being asked. At Clara's shop, the smoke smell still lingered. The black mark on the wall waited for morning. Inside, the new window held the lantern light cleanly. Clara set the lantern on the table and walked to the lower drawer beneath the workbench. She had not opened it in months. Her key trembled in the lock. Inside lay the deed, Matthew's old pocket knife, Annie's ribbon, and a small book with a faded red cover. Clara touched the book and closed her eyes. Caleb stood at the doorway. "What is it?" he asked softly. Clara lifted it. "Annie's storybook." Her voice broke at last. She used to make Matthew read the same story, until he pretended the characters were tired of hearing it too. Caleb's face softened. Clara sat at the table with the book in both hands. For a long time she could not open it. Then she did. A folded paper slipped from between the pages and fell to the floor. Caleb bent and picked it up. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges and written in Matthew's hand. Clara stared at it. She had never seen it before. Caleb held it carefully, as if it might bruise. "It is addressed to you," he said. Clara's breath caught. The lantern burned between them. Outside, the town that had watched her grief for years finally slept under the weight of truth. And inside the little shop at the edge of Mercy Ridge, Matthew Whitlow's last hidden words waited to be read. Caleb held Matthew Whitlow's letter as if it were a living thing. Clara sat at the table, unable to reach for it yet. The lantern stood between them, its flame steady inside the glass. Outside, Mercy Ridge had finally grown quiet, but the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a town holding its breath after speaking the truth too late. Caleb looked at the folded page in his hand. "You do not have to read it tonight," he said. Clara stared at Matthew's handwriting. Her husband had written her name the way he used to say it, plain and gentle, like it belonged somewhere safe. "If I do not read it tonight," she whispered, "I may spend another 3 years afraid of it." Caleb nodded once. He laid the letter on the table and stepped back, giving her room. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. The paper had been folded for years. The creases were soft, the ink a little faded, but the words were still clear. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then I was not strong enough to say everything while I still had breath. Forgive me for hiding this in Annie's book. I thought if sorrow ever took you to the lower drawer, maybe love should be waiting there too." Clara pressed one hand to her mouth. Caleb turned his face toward the window, but he did not leave. She kept reading. "Harlan Pike came to me before the fever took hold. He wanted the East Road parcel. He said a freight line would pass near Mercy Ridge one day, and our shop land would be worth more than thread and mending. I told him no. This place was yours as much as mine. More yours, maybe. You made it breathe. He came again when I was sick. I was too weak to rise from the bed, but not too weak to know a snake when I heard one. He said a widow could be persuaded easier than a husband. I told him my wife was stronger than any man who needed fear to bargain." A sob broke from Clara's chest. The sound was raw and sudden. Caleb took one step, then stopped, waiting for her to decide whether she needed him close. She read on. "If he comes after the deed, remember the lower drawer. If he comes after your name, remember your name was never his to hold. If he comes after the lantern, light it anyway." Clara closed her eyes. Matthew had known. Not everything, not the fire, not the years of whispers, but enough. Enough to leave her a map through a darkness he would not be there to walk beside her. The last lines blurred through her tears. "And Clara, if life ever brings a kind man to your table, do not let my memory close the door on him. I was loved by you. That is more than many men get in this world. If someone else is good enough to sit beside your light, let him. I will not be made smaller by your living. Your Matthew." For a long moment, Clara could not move. Then the letter slipped from her fingers onto the table. Caleb's face was pale. His eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. Clara looked up at him. "He knew I would be afraid." Caleb's voice was rough. "He knew you." That undid her. She bent over the table and wept, not the silent tears she had learned to swallow in public, but deep, aching grief that had waited years for permission to breathe. Caleb came to her then, slowly enough that she could stop him. She did not. He knelt beside her chair. Clara reached for his hand. It was the first time she had done it without fear of who might see, without shame, without explaining it even to herself. Caleb held her hand in both of his, careful and firm, like something precious but not fragile. "I loved him," she said through tears. "I know. I loved my little girl. I know. I do not want to stop." Caleb's thumb moved gently over her knuckles. "Then do not." She looked at him. He swallowed. Love does not have to move out for more love to come in. Maybe it just makes the house bigger. Clara wept harder then, but there was warmth inside it now. By morning, Mercy Ridge gathered outside the sheriff's office. Harlan Pike was placed in a wagon beside Sela's Trent, bound for Pine Hollow under Deputy Mercer's watch. Harlan did not shout this time. He looked smaller in daylight, not because his crimes were small, but because truth had taken away the shadow he used to stand in. Other papers had been found, other names, 2 widows from Dry Creek, an old rancher near Pine Hollow, a blacksmith's sister who had sold land for half its worth after a forged notice. Deputy Mercer promised every case would be opened. Justice had started moving. Slow, dusty, imperfect justice. But moving. Sheriff Cole stood in the street and removed his hat when Clara passed. "Mrs. Whitlow," he said, "I owe you more than an apology." "Yes," Clara said. He flinched a little, then nodded. "I will begin with that." "You can begin by helping every person named in those papers." "I will." Clara looked at him long enough to make sure he understood that words alone would not mend this. Then she walked on. Millie Dawes left for Pine Hollow that afternoon with her Aunt Rose, who had ridden in before noon. James stood near the wagon, hat in both hands. "I will write," he told Millie. Millie looked at him with sad, steady eyes. "Write the truth or do not write." He nodded. "I will try to become the kind of man who can." "That is between you and God first," she said. "Then maybe someday between you and me." It was not a happy ending yet, but it was an honest one. And in Mercy Ridge, honesty had become something almost new. Days passed. Men from town came to scrub the smoke stain from Clara's back wall. Lydia brought glass jars of preserves and bossed everyone like a general. Reverend Bell helped check every land record in the county office. Sheriff Cole rode to Pine Hollow twice in 1 week, and each time he came back looking more tired and more useful. Caleb stayed. Not every night at Clara's table, not in a way that fed gossip. He stayed by taking work near town, by fixing the back fence, by riding to Santa Loma and returning 3 days later with a letter from Thomas Bell in his coat pocket and a peace in his face that had not been there before. Thomas had forgiven him. More than that, Thomas had asked him to stop making a prison out of a lesson. When Caleb told Clara, they were standing beside the porch rail at sunset. "I thought forgiveness would feel lighter," Caleb said. Clara looked at the lantern in her hands. "Maybe first it only feels unfamiliar." He gave a small smile. "That sounds true." Winter came slowly over Mercy Ridge. And with it came evenings where the lantern still burned in the window, but Clara no longer sat beside it alone. Sometimes Lydia joined her with coffee. Sometimes Millie wrote from Pine Hollow, each letter steadier than the last. Sometimes Caleb sat on the porch step below Clara's chair, forearms resting on his knees, watching the road darken as if he had finally stopped measuring how far it could take him. One evening, snow began to fall. Soft, clean flakes drifted across the porch roof and melted on the lantern glass. Clara stood in the doorway with Matthew's letter folded safely in her apron pocket. Caleb was about to light the lantern when he paused. He looked back at her. "May I?" The question held everything. Matthew, Annie, the years, the grief, the new life standing carefully at the edge of the old one, asking permission instead of taking space. Clara nodded. Caleb struck the match. The flame caught. Gold light filled the window. Clara stepped beside him, and this time she slipped her hand into his without trembling. No one spoke for a while. The town settled behind them. A horse shifted at the rail. Snow softened the road. Somewhere far off, a church bell rang once in the cold air. If this story touched your heart, remember Clara's lantern. Sometimes love does not arrive to erase the past. Sometimes it simply sits beside it, warm and patient, until the living remember they are allowed to come home too. Caleb looked down at her hand in his. "I once thought I had no reason strong enough to stay," he said. Clara leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. "And now?" He looked at the lantern, then at the shop, then at the woman beside him. Now I have eaten at your table, he said softly, and somehow I never left. Clara smiled through tears, not because sorrow was gone, but because it had finally made room. Inside the little sewing shop at the edge of Mercy Ridge, Matthew's letter rested near Annie's storybook. The deed lay safe in the lower drawer, the repaired window held against the cold. And on the porch, under falling snow, the widow and the cowboy stood together beside a light that no longer belonged only to loss. It belonged to memory. It belonged to courage. It belonged to home.